Well, hi, and welcome to session 4 in our Busy 1010 Reader Primers. The goal of this tutorial is to help you to recognize, analyze, and evaluate arguments. We've looked at the necessity for critical thinking. We've also talked about reason and emotion, or logic and emotion in critical thinking. And today we want to look at what is an argument in critical thinking. Arguments help us to analyze issues and to assess whether positions on issues are reasonable or unreasonable. An issue, if you think about what is an issue, it's an ill-defined complex of problems involving uncertainty or a controversy. Identifying an issue requires clear thinking as well as good communication skills. To be an argument, it must have a premise and a conclusion. There's a great acronym, GEF, which really helps us when we're thinking about argumentation, and that is give evidence for. You know something is an argument when somebody is trying to give you evidence for, to persuade you with evidence that what they're saying is factual. And I've placed in your folder in the additional resources section a video clip on distinguishing arguments, how I can tell that something is an argument as opposed to a proposition or simply a statement. So here's this idea of give evidence for. If a statement is trying to convince you with statements of evidence, it is an argument. You need to realize that arguments are made up of two or more propositions, one of which, the conclusion, is supported by premises. There are two types of arguments: deductive arguments, which contain a conclusion that necessarily follows from the premise, and an inductive argument, where the premises provide support, but not necessarily proof for the conclusion. I diagrammed this for you in this way. And so when you think of an inductive argument, the claim is that the conclusion probably follows from the premises. And I gave you an example. Most Canadians love hockey. Rob is Canadian. Therefore, Rob probably loves hockey. That's an inductive argument based upon the premise that Canadians love hockey. You can tell an inductive argument because you have an inductive argument generalizations, analogies, and causal arguments. A deductive argument is where the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And so we can state it this way: Rob definitely does not love hockey, for although he is Canadian, he grew up in South Africa, and South Africans love rugby. Rob told me he loves rugby. So that is a deductive argument in which there is certainty, or the word certainly is used, absolutely or definitely. There are four types of premises. So if there are deductive and inductive arguments, there are also four types of premises. The first premise is descriptive. And descriptive premises are based on empirical facts. In fact, they describe a fact that is empirically justifiable by scientific observation. There are prescriptive premises, which in contrast contain value statements. You ought to, you should. That's a prescriptive premise. There are analogical premises that take the form of analogy, in which a comparison is made between two similar events or things. And then there are definitional premises that contain a definition of a key term for purposes of precision or clarification. So those are the four types of premise. The best way to understand an argument is to diagram it. First of all, to bracket the premises, and then from there to determine what the conclusion is and what the proposition or propositions are, and identify the premises. And so I've put in your folder for you diagramming simple arguments, and you can see that in the additional resources section of the content folder. I want to ask you a question. Does knowing how to break down a diagram, or break down and diagram arguments, serve any good purpose in life? When you think about that, especially as we're going to be looking at advertising in our next section, can I look at an argument, break it down into its component parts, understand what is a proposition, what the premises are they giving evidence for those premises, and is their conclusion justifiable? That's the whole issue in critical thinking. How do I determine that what is being stated is factual and relevant and justifiable. So yes, it does serve a very important function in our lives. We think of Hitler, who swayed all of Germany with really amazing oratory, but there was very little critical thinking that engaged his premises, his statements. We think of the white government in South Africa, who encapsulated this idea that there is superiority. There was very little factual evidence. And so we need to be able to break down the argument and understand it and assess it through these logical patterns. There are 5 criteria that are useful then to evaluate arguments. As you think about evaluating an argument, you need clarity. Is this argument clear, or is it obfuscated by all kinds of things that are ancillary that really aren't germane to what the argument is saying? Is it credible? Does it have credibility? I mean, you know about the Flat Earth Society. There's a society that's called the Flat Earth Society that still contends that the Earth is flat. Is that credible? I mean, they have an argument, they have a proposition, but do the facts actually justify or support their conclusion? Is it relevant? Is what is being added to this argument, is it relative and germane to the argument being presented? Is it complete? Does the conclusion flow from the premises, and is it encapsulated as a good thought? And is it sound? Does it hold merit, and does it hold water? So clarity is a question, is the argument clear and unambiguous? Ambiguity is the great weapon of politicians as they state things that can have more than one meaning, and we're not ever quite sure what they're saying. They tend to dance around issues. Credibility. Is there evidence that supports the premise? Relevant. Are the premises relevant to the conclusion? Are they providing good reasons for accepting the conclusion? Is it complete? Are there any unstated premises and conclusions? This is often the case with arguments that are incompletely researched. And then soundness. Are the premises true, and do they support the conclusion? Those are tremendously helpful criteria for evaluating an argument. Once you know how to identify, deconstruct, and evaluate an argument, you're ready to construct your own arguments. And you need to think about that. Does my argument, GEF, does it give evidence for? Is that evidence sound? Is that evidence credible? Is it logical? And does it meet those criteria that we've just listed? And so as you think about that, there are 8 steps to help you develop stronger arguments. Number 1, state the issue. Rob loves rugby, or the earth revolves around the sun, or the earth is round. State the issue and try to use neutral language. Develop a list of premises. Remain as objective and open-minded as possible. Eliminate weak or irrelevant premises. As you write out the argument, look at what holds merit and what is weak. What should I eradicate from that? Establish a conclusion. Organize your argument. Clearly state your conclusion, your thesis in your opening paragraph. Test your argument using others. I love doing this. Whenever I'm trying to develop an argument that I need to present, or a thesis that I need to present, I always test it with others. Does it hold water? Can they see that it's logical? Does it have a rational conclusion? Is it supported by the evidence? Are the premises relevant? And then establish your conclusion. Organize your argument. Clearly state your conclusion in the opening paragraph. Test your argument using others. Revise your argument if necessary. And that's a really important loop in this loop of learning, that you write out the argument, you provide proof for it, you test it with others. With the feedback, you then loop back and strengthen that argument before presenting it as a credible argument. And then, if appropriate, act on your conclusion. And I've shared with you some of the ways in which I've acted on conclusions as I've analyzed certain arguments and certain propositions and certain things that people have presented that I found to be problematic. It's not enough just to know that. Sometimes we have to act on that, and action is really imperative to critical thinking. So working collaboratively to identify and eliminate weak or biased premises can help you make your argument stronger. And watch out, in an earlier session we talked about in the third part of the pyramid, you can have resistance. As you analyze the argument, sometimes there's anger, withdrawal. When people point out the weaknesses in your argument, don't raise resistance. Listen, take that in, analyze.